quick with an orientation about us, and then certainly I'll introduce our presenter today. And with that, let me start it.
Want to drive more students to your Career Center? Want to be able to assist more students in less time? How can this be done when budget cuts are rampant? In the age of these cuts, and when Career Centers are expected to do more with less, Jobs for Grads Now is the solution. Jobs for Grads Now consists of an unparalleled, easy-to-follow 10-step system with hundreds of tips job seekers can use now to help take the guesswork out of finding a job. It takes you from the first step, how to access what's important to you and your career, to becoming a black belt networker and master the art of getting interviews and jobs through the most successful method in today's labor market, networking. This system allows the job seeker the option to earn points as they progress through the 10 steps as well. This interactive format keeps them entertained while learning how to take the guesswork out of finding a job. It's not just reading, it's video leading to action. Through our rapid response team, our experienced career coaches, each with over 10 years experience, allows the job seeker to ask questions at any time, thereby allowing the career centers to do and accomplish more with less. Our information is consistently updated and congruent to what you share with your students and alumni. This allows you to incorporate the material to be used in conjunction with the Jobs for Grads Now system seamlessly. Jobs for Grads Now doesn't stop there. We have an unbridled passion to support your efforts by partnering with you in other ways. Our complimentary webinars cover timely topics that help to drive more students and alumni to the career centers by reinforcing their value and benefit. Why do we go to college? To get a good job. By exploring Jobs for Grads Now in your Career and Alumni Center, you'll be using our simple 10-step system along with our support to help students and alumni get hired by taking the guesswork out of finding a job and by making your mighty task a little easier.
Well, I'd like to thank you for being with us, and with that, we're ready to roll. Thought we'd do that this way, so you know I get so many comments at the end of our webinars, please share more of what you do, so I thought that would help there a little bit with you all. So let's move on. It's Bill Lins here with Jobs for Grads Now, Jobs for All Now, and we are here to help you. Yes, this is a Career Center webinar series, not our Job Seeker series. So it's specifically designed to take the guesswork out of training and address answers to major challenges facing career centers and employment offices today. So I trust all of you are either representing career centers, job centers, or are career trainers. If not, well, sit tight and you're in for a ride as well. And with that, as we move forward here, let me move the screen. There we go. Real quick about us, we're here to take the guesswork out of finding a job. Would love to give you all a free test drive. We have helped out so many individuals and career centers in making it easier in the tasks that you have to explore and to accomplish. And with that, I am going to now move on to the next slide here if I can, or better yet, what I'll do is I'm going to give the control here to Dave Wood. And Dave, you should have control there now.
Yeah, that looks good to me. Can you see that all right?
There we go, Dave. Yeah, super. So let me introduce you if I could. Absolutely. Well, what can I say about Dave Wood in our topic today? Dave is a psychologist and the creator of Type Focus Careers program that's used by hundreds of career centers across North America, and certainly a best-of-breed product in certainly my opinion, and our favorite and most approved assessment that we have in our system. And Dave is a frequent speaker at conferences, including the one coming up, actually it's in Georgia this year, the Global Career Development Association in June, and Dave is one of the featured guest speakers. And due to the great response that we've had from the previous webinar, I guess, Dave, it's been already about a year, but due to that response, we're excited to coerce you back to doing another webinar for us. And those that are listening in here today with us are about to see why people request you back and back here. The topic today, well, student dropouts suffer a loss of self-esteem and decreased future employment opportunities. Their dreams turn into nightmares. Overall, the dropout rate for most educational institutions can be as high as 50%. And the highest dropout rate for post-secondary institution occurs, as most of us know, in the first year of study. Students drop out for a variety of reasons, and the reasons need to be determined early in the school year so that help can be provided while it's still useful. Up to 50% of students who have built their dreams of attaining a better life through education drop out before graduating. Many students don't thrive in the new environments because they're overwhelmed by the changes that they face at these larger institutions. And with that, great topic, and I'm excited to hear more about it. Dave Wood, thank you for being our presenter today. Take it away.
Thanks very much, Bill, and welcome to everyone listening. I understand that there's going to be a lot of university and college participants, as well as some high school, and a real strong welcome to you all. We also have some individual career coaches, and we have some people with a particular emphasis on First Nations or Aboriginal students' retention rates too. So welcome to you all. I've called this When Dreams Turn to Nightmares because when I've talked to students who have been in school and dropped out, their dreams that they had as they went in really quickly turned to ashes for them. And this really comes down to the big problem of low retention rates. Low retention rates are, you can see as they varies by the type of institution. Two-year colleges have higher dropout rates than the bachelor's and master's and graduate school colleges, presumably because of lower aptitude or perhaps less numeracy or literacy skills going into it. Because of this, you'll see that some of the people I've talked to more recently in the two-year colleges have found that their dropout rates are increasing with the emphasis on going back to school with the sort of economic crisis we've had recently. There's more emphasis on going back to school to get a better life, and sometimes they go in without the proper foundation. So that's increasing the difficulty here. If we look at another view of the problem as dropout rate by year, as Bill's mentioned, more than twice as many students drop out in first year as an average of all the other years combined. This sort of makes sense too, because that's in their period of greatest transition is from pre-college university into college and university. But high schools also have the similar problem. In British Columbia, the high school graduation rate for boys and girls in the 6-year period ending in 2007-8 was, you can see, around 80% for boys and girls, but for First Nations or Aboriginals in BC, it says less than 50%. This is something that I was hired by the local school districts to help assess and evaluate, and it's always been very close to my heart because high school is such an important milestone for people to complete their education. It's important that we really understand what's going on here. One of the interesting things is just why there would be such a lowered graduation rate for First Nations, and I think that's something that is will become clear as we go through today's session, is that they have a greater change, greater struggles with the transitions that are going on. Another way to look at the problem is the cost to the organization, which is, yeah?
Dave, I'm sorry, just have a question. What are the reasons the First Nations Aboriginal students are so much lower?
Well, it's, as far as I can see it, Bill, what's happened with the lower graduation rate with First Nations is that their whole, the psychosocial factors that we'll look at will include things like social support, the transition from the middle school and elementary schools on a reserve, for example, and then they transition into the high schools in a larger city. Their changes and the cultural changes as well as the physical changes are just so much more exaggerated. When you examine it on a case-by-case basis, and the teachers who I've discussed this with have told me that their students really struggle. In fact, what would be a positive thing for, let's say, a white student who's graduating, which would be graduation and opening up new doors, may very well be seen by a First Nation student as something that isn't necessarily as positive, because all of the doors opening lead them away from what's so very important to them, which is their family and their culture And so the differences are quite dramatic.
Great. Thank you.
The cost to the organization can be thousands of dollars. If you think of a student whose tuition fees are lost for the duration of the program they would be in, as well as funding for the cafeteria and bookstore and everything else, it's a big problem for universities and colleges just in losing those students. And of course, the cost to the individual is just priceless. Their whole set of what they're hoping to see is just dashed. The failure to thrive model is one that I put together because I was curious about what were the underlying reasons for students who may actually be fairly well prepared academically for them not to thrive. And the model that I've chosen to look at this is from William Bridges. You can look in Amazon and just Google his name. You'll find all sorts of books. The books on transitions are the ones that I think are so critical. And it sort of summarizes by this observation that when we look at any one individual, if you talk to any one individual like Jane Brown, who's dropped out of her course of studies, it's just a tragedy for her. It can be a great loss of self-esteem, and the dreams are taken away. But when we tend to look at it as academics and organizational consultants, we look at things like 50% dropout rates, or we look at a 20% dropout rate in the first year, and we begin to lose sight, I think, of the individual impact that it has on each of the students. That's why I'm so passionate about this, is because I think that it's something that a little bit of change can make a huge difference in different people's lives. The failure to thrive model is based on the concept of transitions that William Bridges proposes. I thought I'd just pedantically read this to make sure we're all clear on it. This is a quote from his book, Managing Transitions. And he goes on to say, it isn't the changes that do you in, it's the transitions. Change is not the same as transition. Change is situational. The new campus, the new class size, the new friends. Transition is the psychological process people go through to come to terms with the new situation. Change is external, transition is internal. Unless transition occurs, in other words, unless there's a psychological acceptance of the change, right, change will not work. And the change we're talking about here is change going into a college, university environment. So change isn't going to work. What that means is they're dropping out. So change focuses on the outcomes. Transition focuses on the endings that you have to make to leave the old situation behind. So what I'd like to sort of address here in this webinar is just to introduce the psychosocial factors that we found to be of value, introduce the concept of the failure to thrive model, and hopefully discuss a number of things that everybody listening can take away at least one thing that might be able to improve the retention or persistence of some of their students. So here's a question to sort of start this, to engage our thinking with William Bridges' transition model. It says, what changes when a high school student goes to college? You sort of think about that. For example, class size would change. Class size from maybe 25 students to 250 or 300 students in an introductory class. So that's a change that takes place, and what ends with those changes. So if the changes, you go from a small to a very large class size, what ends are all sorts of things about knowing who your students are, or your student friends, knowing what the instructor wants, having a sense of support maybe from the instructor. All of that changes. I've just put together some ideas here. I'm sure you would all have additional things. For example, the reference group changes, so you no longer have your close circle of friends that kind of reinforce you and help you understand who you are. A congruence with self-image changes. This is where someone might not, because their reference group is gone, they're not so sure who they are anymore. If we look at the social network, or a social support network, we find that that's obviously gone. They don't have the close friends or the counselor that has taken them under the wing, or the sympathetic instructor who helped them with their assignments or guided them a little bit. The academic expectations are changed. They know what they had to do before to get the marks they were used to. Now it's all over the map. And even as simple as the geographic knowledge. They used to know where they lived, where their locker was, what the school. In a campus, they can literally get lost on the campus.
Hey, Dave, Can you, question here, can you explain more about why congruence with self-image is so important?
Yes, I'll give an example to make that point. Supposing you're a student who's on the football team in high school, and so your self-image involves you would see yourself as a success. You're a football player. You're seen as an athlete. You're viewed that way. You would determine that for yourself. When you get to college, university, and you try out, you may not even make the cut. So suddenly, all of the self-image that you had from high school is thrown into question. And so now, who are you? You say, I used to see myself as a success, and now I'm not so sure. If we looked at that more in terms of, let's say, executive development, you have an executive manager who views himself as a success, and if you asked, why do you see yourself as a success, he would say, because I have a great job, I have a lot of influence and power in the organization, I make a lot of money. These are all the status symbols that would relate to his self-image. When you take that away, it's suddenly thrown into uncertainty, and it's a very, very difficult question for a person to say, like, who am I now that I'm not on the football team? Who am I now that I'm not on, the executive team? The transition model is based on a few concepts here. The vertical axis is the coping effectiveness. The pre-change stability is where the people are before change. The arrow indicates the change itself. This can be instantaneous. They're, 1 week they're not enrolled in the school or at college, and the next week they are. So what first happens is all the changes lead to endings, all the endings that we just talked about. Once the endings have taken place, which can be very rapid in, days or weeks, it throws the student into what Bridges calls the neutral zone. And the neutral zone is that really uncomfortable place where they don't know who they are. They're trying to figure out, what their new sense of, to answer the question, who am I? And it's between the endings and what Bridges would call the beginnings. The beginnings is when you start to make a new change or accept yourself when you've gone through the neutral zone. But when you've gone through the neutral zone and sort of say, this is, I guess, who I am, it's not necessarily positive. It can be, a person might decide that they're worthless. They may also decide that they get through the neutral zone, but what they've come to the conclusion is that there's a sense of failure. They may get through it with a return to status quo, and hopefully they've learned something in the middle here so they can talk, understand themselves in a more fundamental, perhaps more accurate way. This is his model, and one of the things that Bridges likes to talk about are metaphors. So to help explain the model, his metaphor is the Israelites leaving Egypt. The pre-change stability was when they were slaves in Egypt, and what happened then was when they left, they crossed the Red Sea. That was the change, and they were then thrust into endings. So even though they griped and were complaining and were downtrodden in Egypt, they still felt the loss of the stability, and when they were in the desert, they wanted to go back. And the neutral zone for them lasted 40 years, which tends to be 2 generations. And while they were in the neutral zone, they prepared themselves for being competitive in the promised land because they had to fight for it. And so in the Israelites' case, they actually wound up being improved self-awareness. They would have been slaves here. If they'd marched straight from their exiting of Egypt into the promised land, they would have all been killed off. Because they spent 2 generations in the desert, all of the slave mentality was removed, and they were now desert warriors, which prepared them. So really the metaphor is the neutral zone is where all the work takes place. It's the asking and answering the question, who am I post-change? But it's also the most difficult period because it's filled with turmoil and self-doubt and needs an awful lot of support. And Bridges uses a term. He says you might want to flee the neutral zone. If it's so uncomfortable, you just can't stand it, then you want to go back to where it was pre-change. And that's a real danger. And in the client base that we're talking about, they leave the neutral zone and flee the neutral zone by dropping out. So if we take another closer look at this ending phase, Bridges talks about stages of grieving. He says that with change inevitably comes endings, and endings that you grieve the loss, what is ended. So the example here I'll use is a high school student who's an A student, knows how to do that, gets assignments done. When they get into college, they discover that they're not getting their A marks. So in the stages of grieving, from Kubler-Ross would be the first stage is denial. They think, well, everything's great, you know, I'm struggling a little bit. But then when they start getting their first marks and they're not so good, they get angry and they blame others. The stupid professor, stupid test wasn't what I was expecting. Then they sort of say, well, it wasn't so stupid, but, you know, things aren't great. But now if I just really study hard, I know I can do that. And then they find that that's still not getting them where they go, and they kind of get into the point where they say, well, gee, what's the use? And it's at that point that they start stepping into readiness, and now they can really look at it and say, okay, I'm struggling, things haven't worked out, now what? And that's the point where some of them will wind up in your office as a student seeking direction on what to do with the world as it's falling apart for them. So the metaphor here is one where I think you can utilize this immediately in your counseling process. I've done this in lots and lots of small group workshops, and I think it would work tremendously well with orientation classes and so forth. But we can see that the students who are grieving the loss due to the endings, and they're now into the neutral zone, they're confused and uncertain over who they are, and they're really struggling with this. So what you wind up doing is asking them what would be a metaphor or symbolic picture for this period. And simply ask them literally, like, what does this feel like, and how would you describe it? And some answers you might get, for example, is, well, I feel lost, or everything's out of control. If we take the example of I feel lost, one of the ways you can tease this out is to probe for more detail. So I would ask them, for instance, where are you lost? Is it a forest, or, you know, it says lost at sea, or they describe it, let's say, as a forest. And what time of day is it? What time of year is it? What do the trees look like? Is it a bog? Is it an alpine meadow? Tell me more. What happens is that they're now expressing sort of their deepest sort of feelings about what they're feeling in terms of this neutral zone in ways that make a lot of sense for them. If you have small groups, which is very effective for time-wise, you can ask the small groups to pick a metaphor, describe it, like write it out on a flip chart paper and present it back to the other small group members. And very often what you'll see is when they diagram it out is these kind of concepts will come up. Directionless. They might draw circles indicating they've been walking around in a circle. Not prepared, they're cold and hungry, they're lonely, defenseless, and they feel helpless. This all comes out in the diagram, and you can talk about that. Then what you can do is change the metaphor. As rather than lost, you pose the question, what would be it like if you were going on an adventure? So it's exactly the same environment, but now you've planned it, you've stepped into it voluntarily, and you've sort of prepared for it. And you can see all the ways this changes. So you have a plan to follow. You might bring a compass or a GPS. You've got supplies and friends, and you've trained yourself in survival skills. That's sort of a straightforward thing, and people really make that transition from the model that, or the metaphor that you've talked about, to a more positive experience. And you can subtly change that into, well, lost on campus to an adventure on campus. So you can sort of take the same thing at that moment and say, okay, these are the same things we can look at in terms of where you're at right now on campus. So you can see from the list here that directionless, they need an immediate plan. And if they're really struggling and they might have, you know, blown some courses pretty badly, they may need to drop some courses. You can see the rest of the things. They may need to be connected to clubs or basic skills upgrading. These are all things that help in a very concrete way. Because what we've done is that what we've done to change the metaphor from what to what. And this discussion is engaging because it fits their experience and leads to a discussion of reasonable actions that can form a plan. And it's the action plan that takes away the sense of anxiety and helplessness. They know what they're doing now, and they can begin to move ahead. So I think this is something that everybody can sort of apply in their career option settings that you'd be dealing with.
Right.
So just, yes?
No, you're fine. No, interesting.
Okay, so as a recap, we can see that the transition model starts with the pre-change stability. The change takes place. There's a loss of of coping skills in the endings. They struggle in the neutral zone, and then when they kind of come to grips with who they think they really are, that decision, then they wind up beginning to be able to take a forward motion. And the failure to thrive model puts the psychosocial aspects into context with transition. So at a summary, at this point, we can see that the transition model predicts students will be under the stress of the neutral zone and are trying to understand who they are. What we don't know is how the stress expresses itself in terms of retention or how it is affected by the psychosocial factors. So we'll sort of turn our attention to that. The current research is data that we've taken from our website, which is from, in this case, 20,000 university students. We've created 10 psychosocial factors that we call as success factors, success meaning that they are successful in completing their course of studies. And the various success factors were based on the research when we created this. So these sort of topics like accepting responsibility, academic competitiveness, time management skills, and so forth are the ones that are involved in what we're calling the 10 psychosocial factors. And this just shows, for example, some sort of validity to this. The way you would read this, if I just back up one slide, we can see that time management skills are one of the topics of the success. And this data here is generated by the 20,000 university students. The high school grade point average is what they've indicated themselves is their high school grade point average as they came into university. And time management is a self-expressed view on our success factor questionnaire. So you can see, for example, that the students who are at the A students up at the top right here, they're much more, the time management skills are much more elevated here than below average. And then it's sort of a scalloping effect here, and then it's a bit neutral, and then it starts to go the other way, and then it starts to climb the other way. And so when we get down below really a B plus sort of average, we start to see the B and lower high school grades indicating that they're assessing themselves as having poor time management skills. And if we compare time management to the personality type preferences of judging and perceiving, and I know I spelled it wrong here on my statistical package, but that's spelled, so this is the judging perceiving type factor, and we can see that a whole lot more judging types are identifying themselves as having the higher order time management skills, which is kind of what you would expect. So this is another measure of validity as we look at the personality type of. Yes,
Dave?
no.
Yeah, Dave, question here. Would you explain the differences between judging and perceiving? Okay.
Judging and perceiving are two of the type factors involved in the personality type theory. Judging is defined as people who have a preference for having an organized life, and perceiving is defined as people who would have a preference for having a spontaneous life. So judging types, because they have a preference for organizing their world, tend to make lists, have set goals, and achieve those goals. They tend to organize their day and week a little more concretely than perceiving types, who tend to take things a little more as they come. So when we compare that definition of what the two type factors mean and look at the relation to the time management, self-assessed time management, it makes perfect sense that over here, and the people who are rating themselves as having high time management skills, there are 4 or 5 times as many judging types as perceiving types. And when we go to the other end, we see that people who are rating themselves as having low time management skills, there's about 4 times as many perceiving types as judging types. So what this just sort of indicates in a variety, and this is what we would tend to help people in our program, is because we're giving not only career direction but some self-awareness around what will work for them in an effective way. Here's some of the other data. I'll just kind of run through this quickly. You can see here this over 19,000 people in this sample. What we found is that the competitive attitude, another one of the psychosocial factors, correlates positively to the high school grades. And if we look at the high school grade average, again with competitive attitude, you can again see this very striking scalloping effect. So if you have a competitive attitude, you're way up here, If you have a low competitive attitude, you're down here, so there's a scalloping effect here. And then as you get to Bs and lower, the scalloping effect goes the other way. When we look at competitive attitude, again, back to the misspelled judging and perceiving, it tends to fit as well. So people who are competitive about marks are those that are willing to work hard to get a good grade. They identify themselves as being competitive. They tend to be more organized and purposeful in their studies, and then when it goes the other way, it sort of slides off the scale that way. Correlation here is between social integration and high school average. So the social integration here, you can see again is a positive score. Social integration is sort of the ability to reach out. So we're looking at sort of questions that would say, you know, I've made good friends on campus. Social integration tends to be a pretty important variable, as we'll see. So social integration is, you know, I made good friends on campus. I'm active in campus activities. What we'll find here is that extroverts tend to be self-scoring themselves a lot more highly than introverts, which tends to make sense. So extroverts tend to develop friends faster when they're thrust into a new situation. They tend to join activities more frequently than introverted preference students would. So this makes sense. I've noted here, because I'm going to draw attention later in the slides and presentation to, this is what I mean by low integration, these two groups here. So this is a scale here from 1 to 5. The bottom two sort of indicators are people that are scoring low in social integration. So now that's sort of the data from the 20,000 students related to all of the psychosocial factors. I'm going to turn now to data that comes from 78 first-time, full-time students from a large state university with GPA and retention status available. This data was collected in the start of the 2007 year. 1 year later, 18 had dropped out, 60 were still enrolled, which is a 23% dropout rate, which is right on the money for what we've seen on the general statistics. And all the type focus data was captured at the beginning of the 2007 school term, which will be important later to realize. So what we did was we looked at a chi-square test comparing the success factor scores with students who were enrolled or not enrolled 1 year after registration. And these were the 10 psychosocial factors, and these were some of the results that we found. So all of these results were in the positive direction. In other words, the enrolled students accepted more responsibility, were more actively competitive, had higher self-esteem, better general health, better time management skills, reached out more frequently, had better social support. They're all positively correlated.
Dave, question here. What kind of questions define social support?
Okay, that's a good question, because social support and external commitments tend to be two of the most highly sort of statistically significant topics here. So in our success factors questionnaire, social support is a combination of 3 questions. These 3 questions are: my friends all agree that getting a good education is important, my family is proud of me for getting an education, and my family understands and is sympathetic to the amount of work my studies take. We add all those 3 up, we call that social support. And we can see that there's highly significant result here from the social support is a significant factor in whether or not students were enrolled at the end of the first year. And so I want to just highlight a couple of things, because these are very small numbers. There's just 18 not enrolled and 60 that were enrolled. So even though the time management skills, for example, is not significant, when we look at the actual data, these are the 78 students now, we can see that those who had very high time management skills and high time management skills had a lot more enrolled than not enrolled. And when we go to the low and very low time management skills, it reverses the other way. It's this familiar scalloping effect, again, in the predicted direction. So even though the time management skills with this small sample is only 0.49, it's still an important factor to consider. When we look at the social support that you just had me clarify, Bill, we can see that this is significant at 0.02, and what we'll find here again, the social support, again, there's they're self-assessing themselves here. So at the beginning of 2007, the students answered those 3 questions I'd mentioned, and they wound up a year later with nothing else going on, finding that that was highly predictive. So people that were identifying themselves as high, very high and high having social support, their enrollment was much higher on a percent basis. If you go to the other way, low and very low, you can see the vast majority of the people in those categories did not persist, or they dropped out. Just to tease out a little bit further, I found this quite interesting. If we look at low integration, and those are the questions, for example, I've made good friends on campus and so forth, we can see for the definition of the low integrated group, there's 19 in this group. There's 10 introverts and there's 9 extroverts. So it's pretty much split between the two. But you'll notice that all of the people that dropped out that were not enrolled a year later, all of them were from the extroverted group. And the way this looks, if we just graph it a bit differently, is we say that after 1 year, the people that were enrolled, all of them, 100%, were introverts, and about 55% were extroverts. So 40-some-odd% of the extroverts who had low social integration, self-scoring, did not last. And so what we can see is that all 10 students with very low to low scores on social integration who were introverts persisted. Only half of the extroverts did. So that helps you to tease that out, because if you just looked at one single score, you wouldn't be looking at it accurately enough to be sensitive. If we go back to this graph, which looks at extroverts, introverts, and social integration, it's these 2 groups here. It's the extroverts who are registering low on their self-assessed social integration that are at risk. Now this data here is data captured by the university that was sharing their data with me. They stripped out all the student identifiers, and we just brought our 2 sets of data together so I could look at it. What we can see here is that there are some, when you look at the 18 students who were not enrolled, there's some big clumps here. And this was significant at the 0.02 level, is the chi-square. And so these are the 2 groups that were sort of, from this point of view of enrollment, not struggling a bit. And when we tease that out by looking at the psychosocial factors enrolled, we can see that there are, in the Latino American, for example, there are a lot more sort of very low and low social support in this group. So what it tends to say is that, yes, there are ethnicity issues at stake, and some of those may be sort of culturally bound. And I think that would also go back to the First Nations and Aboriginals, is that the fact that a student is of a particular sort of ethnic background doesn't mean anything. It's just an identifier, but it's what that means, what it brings to the student, the cultural acceptance, the reference group, all of these different social factors. What I did here, just out of interest, was I took all of the 10 psychosocial factors and I just added them all together and took the top third and middle third and bottom third, and then compared it to the status, whether they were enrolled or not enrolled. So what we can see here is that, and by the way, because not all these type factors are as statistically significant as they would be if they had higher numbers, the probability for this crosstab here is just 0.2. But what we can see when we look within it, just sort of looking at the numbers, we can see that the percentage of people in the top third who are enrolled is twice as much as those who weren't enrolled. And when we look on the bottom third, we can see that twice as many who dropped out were in the bottom third, those that stayed and were enrolled. So it's just another indicator that when we're looking at this in a global sense, these factors, they tend to add up. And what I've done in this particular graph is I've narrowed down the view of it to those three success factors. So this is a combination of general health, social support, and external commitments. And you might remember that social support and external commitments were highly correlated or highly significant in their impact. And so what we're seeing here is that the higher levels here of this combination, they're all enrolled. And it's when you get down to the bottom level that, the red, which is the not enrolled indicator, starts to take over. So this is, again, pretty strong visual. And again, that's 0.06, which is, very indicative of significance, especially given the small numbers. And if we drill down even deeper, we see that this is significant at the 0.01. And what we're looking at here are the external commitments. So with external commitments of heavy and very heavy external commitments, it has a really strong impact on the persistence of the students. So when we look at the very heavy and heavy commitment levels, we can see when you add these up, it's about 33%. So 1 in 3 who have heavy and very heavy external commitments is not enrolled after the year. And here it's 5% or 1 in 20. So even though there's some dropouts here, it's a very, very much smaller number.
Hey, Dave, quick question on that slide. What kind of time commitments define a heavy or very heavy?
That's very heavy is a combination of 3 questions. And the and the questions are, for example, the amount of time I spend on family responsibilities during the school year, and then we had it broken out by hours. Over 30 hours, 20 to 30 hours, 10 to 19 hours, and so forth. And then another one was the amount of time I spend on employment during the school year, over 30 hours per week, 10 to 20 hours per week, and so forth. So what we're finding here then, and that's for all 3. So we're really finding that we've got somewhere here with very, very heavy. People are probably identifying that their commitments outside their academic pursuits, which could be their family, could be sports, it could be employment, can be as high as 50 hours and more per week. And then the heavy can be down as low as, or is over 30 to 40 hours per week. So you've got very heavy commitments here. And so this really ties together into other areas too. Why would a person be having such high commitments? And it may be that they're coming from a place where they have to look after their younger siblings. It may be that they have to work because they don't have the money to pay for everything at once. All sorts of things going on. But this is just an indicator. And one of the important things here is that, I've just put this on the screen, is that the students completed these questionnaires in the fall of '07, and the above data is from the fall of '08. And why I think that's important is because this information can be asked way early in the term. In some cases, it can be asked even before they're on campus. If they're enrolling people in August, they haven't even got to their classes yet. You don't have to wait until you flag students with low GPAs after the first term. By then, I think the transition has created some casualties. So the failure to thrive model, I've broken it into kind of a matrix, saying you've got students who have poor skills. This would be people who may be coming in with low numeracy and literacy skills, maybe bad attitude, past performance has not been as high as you would think, and those with good skills. So these are people who are the high school grades indicating aptitude and willingness to put the effort in. And then we've got on the left side here the psychosocial, general health and external demands. So the first quadrant here we can see with people who may not have the best skill sets, but they're supported. They're supported by all the different things we've just looked at. So they will probably struggle with transition because transition is hard for everybody. But they may need some basic training. They may find the need to drop courses because of their poor skill sets. They may want to change a major or transfer to a less rigorous institution. But the thing here is that they're going to come through the transition period into the beginnings probably as winners. They're seeing themselves who they are, but they're supported. The transition period for them is going to struggle as with anybody, but they're coming through it positively. The people with good skills, most of those will persist. They'll succeed. They've come in with good skills and they're supported, so they just are, they get through it. You're not surprised by this group. This group has come in with good skills and they succeed, and that's just what you're expecting. The low skills and with no support, these are people that I think of as lost souls. They have dramatic failure rates. From the university data we collected of the 78 people, people with a low GPA in the first term, 55% who had a low GPA of less than 1.3 dropped out. These are people who not only are struggling with the academic requirements and the time management skills and basic campus survival skills, but they're not being supported at home either, and they may be working long hours. So they're really in trouble. The people with good skills who may not have the social support, they struggle with transition. They may still get through, but they have lower than expected GPAs. They might be fragile. For example, if they get sick for a week, they're in real trouble. If they have a negative experience like their girlfriend or boyfriend leaves, they may be in trouble. And this is the group that I sort of thought as the failure to thrive. You've got students who are well prepared, all of the academic qualifications you'd think would prepare them for smooth sailing, but they just struggle. And I think they're struggling because of the psychosocial, and the reason that's a struggle is because of the transition period they're in. So in terms of what can be done to support students who are in transition, I think one of the things is an early warning system. I've got research that I will share with people who ask for it, some good research articles that show that high school marks are a good indicator of college success, better indicator than SAT scores, and as well as our type focus success factors. They can be used to identify students very early. If you're not using the type focus success factors, you can simply look at high school grades and get a good read very early. And this means then that you can flag students who you can kind of predict are going to struggle. The next point is proactive advising, counseling, and mentoring. This is, various universities that purchase our programs. We know that some of them have, 2-credit sort of introductory courses. Some build in that all of their orientation class goes through the program. Lots of different ways to do this. Generally speaking, when you look at the literature, the more proactive you are, and some terms they use are intrusive counseling, intrusive career development, you're really getting into them and putting it in front of the students. Recent research that was listed in a website that I'll put in the references just talked about what we probably already know, which is that if you have an accurate sort of matching of the person's personality strengths and interests to the majors and what they're interested in, then they not only graduate more frequently, they graduate sooner, so not piling up as much student debt, and they typically get better grades. And finally, an integrated support program, career offices with student affairs, and that might mean a retention office and counseling offices. A lot of groups are already sort of integrated in that way, and that's terrific. I know of a few groups where they're not so integrated, so it's a bit of a disconnect. One of the things that I had, which I was it just really struck me, was with such high, with up to 50% of people dropping out, when we're working so hard to make our students sort of match to the best career options possible and trying to assist them in every way to develop a good career plan and a reasonable one that they can follow, and then have half of them drop out, which just smashes their career plans totally. So it seems to me that that's why it's important for career offices to have a hand in with the retention offices and working a bit on that, and with the retention offices recognizing that retention will be increased if the career development is good for the students. So just in a quick summary, I want people that are listening to take heart. It's complex situations but doable. Can't do everything at once, but you could maybe just change the way you introduce topics in discussion to look at the neutral zone. You can start small, prove as you go. Start with one class, maybe put on a time management class, for example. Collaborate with other departments. They sometimes share different budget lines so that they're happy to share information back and forth. And finally, a big thank you. I hope it's been worth your time, and I believe that we'll take some questions in a minute. I'll just show this slide as Career Center webinars that are coming up for
Yes.
Bill Linz and his.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Thank you so much for that information. We do have a couple of questions here, which we'll address here in just a moment. Thank you so much for your time again. Just want to draw everybody's attention real quick to, yes, our Career Center webinars. You can sign up for them at jobsforgradsnow.com/Career Center. And then our Job Seeker webinars, our next one, the schedule is March 14th, how to talk your way into the job that you want. Bill Hickman, again, like Dave Wood, individual that's been requested to come back again. And he's a fascinating individual. What a great experience he's had in his lifetime and a great vast knowledge that he's helped in helping many job seekers. And I'm sure he can help your job seekers as well. So with that, thank you. Yeah, a couple of questions here. Let me go to a couple of them if I could, Dave.
Sure.
Let's start here. What is a First Nation student?
First Nation student is the Canadian equivalent of an Aboriginal student.
Gotcha. I thought so. What are the similarities between a First Nation and a first-generation college student retention rates?
I don't know because the college information that I'd received wasn't broken out by Aboriginal or First Nations groups. I would suspect the first generation is by definition means that you're the first that your mother or father doesn't have a university degree, and that kind of comes to one of our social support questions. We ask there, my family understands and is sympathetic to the amount of work my studies take. If a person's never been to college or university, or their parent units haven't been, it's very difficult for them to appreciate just the stresses that people under. So first generation students, as defined that way, typically struggle a little more than people who come from a household that has one or both parents have earned a degree.
Gotcha.
My sense of my guess would be that Aboriginal students would be even more challenged by the differences of the culture and in Vancouver, for example, in North Vancouver, the North Vancouver School District backs on to two fairly large reserves, and so the students coming from the reserves have all of the transitional issues that other students have, but on top of that, they've got a very strong culture that they almost have to leave in order to in order to succeed in the educational arena. It's not totally, but it's strongly sort of by that way. So
Gotcha.
I don't know the data, but my hunch is that you would find it would be much higher dropout rates for students, even compared to first generation.
Thank you. Do we know the age range for the university students surveyed?
University students that are in the sample of the 78 were all first year full time. So they're likely in the sort of 18, 19-year-old range. The university, the large databases based on 20,000 likely would be sort of, I would think that the sort of modal age would be 18 or 19 in that as well.
Gotcha. Okay. Here we go. Just going on here. Let me see if there's another one. Dave, if you would, again, share with us your email, because I'm getting that and getting requests of this PowerPoint, if it would be available. And I've just been sharing that, yes, if they could just email you.
My email is dave.wood@typefocus, that's T as in Terry, Y, P as in Peter, E, FOCUS.com, Typefocus. It's short for Focus on Personality Type. So it's dave.wood@typefocus.com. I have a number of really, really good articles on best practices around retention, and I'd gladly share the PowerPoint with anybody that would like. So
Thank you so much.
I will share all I can.
Thank you so much. You always have been beyond forthcoming there. Any suggestions on how to get students into the office to speak with an advisor or a counselor? Boy, that's a good one.
Well, one of the big state universities made it a requirement that it was part of they weren't going to get their grades if they hadn't gone through the process. So that's an indication. I think there's a lot of marketing that can take place. Well, like several schools will have situations in the first week, sort of an orientation frosh week. There can be a lot of encouragement there. We find that there's a lot of engagement with students because they're linking through to the website, and essentially what happens a lot of times is that students will let's say you have 100 students who take the Type Focus program or some other program. They'll generally find that probably 80% of them, let's say 80, wind up saying, well, that just fits what I already knew about myself and it kind of affirms what I'm doing, and that's fine. Maybe 15 of them have some interest in pursuing it further, that they can find that there's little things they want to adjust, and maybe 3 or 4 or 5, 5% at the most perhaps, have something that is really puzzling to them now, and they want to change. So you may find, for example, like in our success factors, we not only talk about the 10 success factors, but we look at things like, have you selected a major? If you haven't selected a major, then when you're in your first year, what's the student doing? They're obviously kind of casting about. They're looking really for career direction through hit or miss of the courses. So having not selected a major is something that's a key issue, and if you use the program that we have, as they enter into the program, you can sort for, let's say, have you selected a major? If they haven't selected a major, you can mass email them through our program very effectively to invite them into, to proactively. And that goes back to that last slide I said about best practices, where rather than hoping that they will come in, you can sort of push your knowledge out. You can so as long as you have them in the program, in our program anyway, you can identify them, you can sort for that variable and that range of variables, and then actively pursue them. You can even flag them for future, follow-up. Lots of things that can be done that way. And if you put yourself in the student's position, they're coming from perhaps a school where they were, if not supported totally, at least, they had that sense of who they were, and teachers knew this. And now they're in a large sort of impersonal environment, and they're not necessarily even going to have the wherewithal to seek out help. But if they get an email to them, I think they jump at it. And we know that resources are slim, so I would encourage people to do group exercises. Mass email 100 people from the 1,000 that have taken the program in the first week, and maybe of the 100 that will come to a major workshop, and you run groups of 20 and you do a time management workshop, or you do the neutral zone discussion workshop. These are all things that are
Dave?
Yes.
Okay. You just blanked out there. Okay. Last question. Thank you. And of course, you can always check out Jobs for Grads now, because we're all about getting students engaged there as well. But once you identify the risk factors early on, what are some strategies that you recommend we use to help students?
I think it's kind of an expansion of what I was just saying. You know what the risk factors are. If you look at all of the 10 sort of risk factors and just see, well, what would logically make sense? For example, general health. Someone like the general health questions are things like, I can handle the amount of stress I'm under, I rarely get sick, I lead a healthy lifestyle. People who are self-scoring themselves on those things and saying, I strongly disagree, I lead a healthy lifestyle, I strongly disagree that I can handle the stress. These are people that are really saying, here I am, I need some help here. I think the whole thing is to start small. I've always encouraged people. It's everybody's life is so busy, but you can't do everything at once. But you can do something at once. You could get 10 people together and do a focus group and see what might be advantage. You can contact the people in whatever way you need to, when you found the risk factors, and invite them to specific workshop type things that would be like on time management skills, or to get a group together that might need the more social support, especially the extroverts that just aren't making friends. They've been dislodged enough from their regular routines that they're not able to continue with that way. These are the types of things I think that we can all do and build on. And holy cow, you know, there's the big organizations like the National Career Development Association and the National Association of Careers and Colleges and Employers. These big organizations, you know, have LinkedIn websites that can be pose questions, and it's very effective. I belong to some of them, and I'm just following them all the time, and it's great advice, great things that your peers can offer you.
Great. Dave, thank you very much. There's a couple more questions. I urge, Dave, if you do that one more time, again, you all can email myself here. You see it on the screen. But Dave, share with me your email address one more time. That'd be great.
I'd be glad to. It's dave.wood, W-O-O-D, at typefocus.com. And that's T as in Terry, Y, P as in Peter, E, F-O-C-U-S.com. So dave.wood at typefocus.com. And I just want to thank you all for persisting in this webinar. I'm passionate about this, and I know Bill is too, and we both want to support you in the best way we possibly can.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and feel free to email us, obviously, if we can help further in anything that we can do to assist you. Thanks for spreading the word that together we can make and take the guesswork out of finding a job now for our students and job seekers. And thanks for your efforts that you all do at the Career Center. With that, Dave Wood, once again, thank you, my friend, so much. Have a great day, and wishing you the best today and all the rest for all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.